Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming, and for our viewers on Zoom, thank you for joining us as well. My name is Scott Schultz. I'm the financial officer at the Village Affairs in Hot Springs here, and I'm really pleased to present the 2023 to 2027 financial plan to you today. What I'll do is I'll run through a presentation first, and then if there's any questions or comments after, we definitely welcome them. And so we'll just jump right in. So first, we'll just run through just where we are in the budget process. So basically, the budget was originally introduced at the committee of the whole meeting in January. We've taken kind of comments from there and incorporated into the plan. We did first and second readings at the last council meeting. And basically, we're right here right now. So we're doing open house. Then the plan is that we'll do third reading at the council meeting tonight. And then the following council meeting on April 3rd will be adoption. So basically, according to the charter for BC municipalities, we have to basically do this process and present a financial plan to council every year. So just a quick recap of the 2022. So as I think anybody can understand, we saw both challenges and opportunities. COVID-19 kind of was drawing to a close, so a lot of our facilities reopened. The summer visitation was very strong. Business hotels were busy. The paid parking stalls were well used. On the fire department side, we got a new fire truck that was delivered, which was very exciting for them and something that keeps the community safe. On the kind of the challenging side is lots of inflationary pressures, as everybody is experiencing in the world today. So just some information as we go. For utilities, we saw average of 20% increase. Fuel average 30%, insurance about 10%. Employee benefits 14%, and chemicals and supplies for treatment plants was over 30% higher in 2022. So we also ran into some supply chain issues, and that really affected the timing of our capital projects. So what we unfortunately had to do is carry many capital projects through to 2023. We are seeing those supply chain issues soften a little bit now, and materials are becoming more available. So we'll probably be able to complete a lot of those projects this year. Overall, the village remains in a very good financial position. We ended 2022 with a surplus. Just a quick touch on the audit process. We undergo a very robust and detailed audit process every year, and that's about 90% complete. So the completed financial statements will be available for public viewing in April, and that'll be at a council meeting in April. So moving forward to 2023, just generally speaking, municipalities typically have two main sources of revenue, one being taxation, and that's for just general services provided to the public. The other side of it is user pay services, and the idea behind those is the user will pay for the specific service that they benefit at that point in time. So examples would be curbside collection, utilities, water, wastewater, pay parking, that sort of thing. So some numbers here for taxation, we're looking at about $2.66 million taxation in 2023. Business licensing, about $28,000 in revenue. Pay parking, $390,000 is estimated. Boat launch revenue, $25,000, and curbside collection about $145,000. For grants, we're expecting about $518,000, and that consists of the following: about $330,000, which is a small communities fund grant that comes to us every year. About $128,000 is from the what's called a Community Works grant, and basically that's from gas tax, and about $53,000 in environmental initiatives. It's called Local Government Climate Action Plan. It's a new program started in 2022, and it's basically to promote green initiatives that can be all sorts of things, from EV charging stations to just other things environmentally friendly things. So that we expect as well in 2023. Some general expense highlights. On the wages side, we are in negotiations with our local union, CUPE, and that's in negotiations as we speak. On the professional services side, we have to complete what's called a building condition assessment, and that's basically a new accounting standard that is coming into play this year. It's called asset retirement obligation, and what it does is tries to recognize costs related to the disposal of an asset, so a building, and recognizing those costs now versus realizing those costs right at the end. So that's a new accounting standard that we're working towards. The collective bargaining consultant, that's again goes one-on-one with the negotiations. And the local government climate action plan, that's exactly what I just talked about with the grant. So that's about $53,000 that will be basically looking to put together a environmental plan that we can kind of rely on the next few years. Technology, just general IT support services. So that includes our accounting software, Zoom, of course, public consultation, and just general IT support. For the fire department, basically, if they have a surplus at the end of the year, that gets transferred to a specific reserve for them. And that funds future equipment purchases. For example, like the fire truck we just purchased was all funded by the fire reserve. So that kind of goes in towards there. On the protective services side, we had COVID-19 grant, summer policing that ended in 2022. And emergency services, we do have an agreement with the District of Kent, and that will continue. General expenses on the development side, we budget about $35,000 for municipal engineering every year. And also on the planning side, just general planning services, we budget for $80,000. And then there's some carry forward budget from prior years for the official community plan of about $21,000. And as a note, that was funded by gas tax. On the public works side, we are facing quite a bit of maintenance costs. Our fleet is aging quite a bit. So we are trying to identify that and work that in. Also, under building repairs and maintenance, we have $30,000 that was carried forward for asbestos remediation in the public works building. So that project is in the beginning stages now, and we hope to move forward on that very soon. Community services side, there's a budget plan for Indigenous infrastructure. That's new funding, and that will be budgeted from RMI. And RMI is Resort Municipality Initiative. That's basically a grant because we have resort municipality status. So $25,000 from that, and then a very small amount from taxation to balance that out. For capital projects, I'll run through these at a high level, but again, at the end, if anybody has any specific questions, please feel free to ask. Just a general note on how we budget capital projects in the plan. You'll see sometimes when we have application progress, that means our grant funding, we have application progress, it may or may not be approved. But in order to be able to submit the application, we do need to have it in the budget. So you'll see that these amounts are budgeted for. However, if the grant, for example, isn't approved, we won't get the grant funding, but we also won't incur the expenditure. So it's a net zero impact. So just jumping right into it, we have identified a need to raise the wastewater treatment plant access road and dike, and that's ultimately to protect the facility with rising lake waters and increased water events. And so this will be about $6 million. It's a new project for this year, and it's identified to be funded by a grant. Again, this application's in progress right now. We've also identified the need for some drainage work on Hot Springs Road, and that's about $2 million budgeted for. It's to be funded by grant, again, applications in progress. And the other part will be the drainage DCCs. And what DCCs are is development cost charges. And that's when new areas of the village get developed. There's a portion of that that goes towards increasing and updating infrastructure. Spring Park upgrades are in progress, so it's a carry forward project. And what that is for washroom, covered shelter, ping pong table, and water fountain at Spring Park. It's funded by Parks Development Cost Charges and Reserves, and there's about a $540,000 carry forward, and that's again in progress. That should be completed this year. Fire Hall Addition again is another project that's in progress. There's about $264,000 remaining in budget. The whole project was about $750,000, and that is entirely funded by a provincial grant. Continuing on capital projects, we've identified the need for safety stairs to the flood pump, and that's a definite safety thing. It's a carry forward project. Again, we weren't able to complete it last year, but we're working on it this year. That's funded by gas tax and reserves. Bus shelters, we budget for some new bus shelters each year, and we're going to try to do 2 this year. It's something we do every year, and it's funded by gas tax. A boat launch dock replacement. This project is actually starting right very soon. It's budgeted for $20,000. It's a carry forward project from last year, and that's funded by reserves. And then office equipment is just a general budget line that funds general IT, furniture replacements, and that's funded by reserves. Moving forward to EV station match funding. So basically this ties into the grant I talked about earlier with the green initiatives. Sometimes the grants require match funding, what's called, and that's, you know, basically a little bit of funding from another source. So we've identified that to be $14,000, and that's funded by gas tax. We'll see how kind of that all plays out, but it's going to be mostly grant funded anyways. We've got a walk behind sweeper here for public works, and that allows just general cleaning of Esplanade and other areas in town. It keeps things quite clean. And also Snowblade for the Kubota utility vehicle, about $8,000. And these are both funded by Public Works Capital Reserve. And finally, this is a 2024 budget item, but basically replacement of a Public Works vehicle. And just as a note, this is zero impact to taxation. So our previous Public Works vehicle that we borrowed against, the borrowing is now complete on that. So this would just basically keep that going. So Resort Municipality Initiative, this is, I just touched on it a little bit earlier. This is basically grant funding from the province because of our resort status. And it basically provides funding to beautify the beach and increase infrastructure at, you know, in the tourist areas of the village. So we've got one project that's almost complete. That's the berm project. I'm sure everybody knows it's by the washrooms. That was kind of dual purposed to kind of have a gathering area for people, but also provide flood protection for the washroom. About $150,000 left in that budget, and that will be completed actually right away here. Also, we're working on a project, the Lagoon Walkway project. It's about $886,000 budget, and that is just in its starting stages, but that should be moving forward pretty soon. There's some grant funding that we're working with the province on, and then the balance will be funded by this RMI budget. Also, each, I can't remember the exact time frame, but we do have to develop what's called a resort development strategy every number of years. And that just identifies the plan for what we would like to do for the tourism infrastructure, et cetera, here in the village. So we've got $405,000 in the budget for that, and a good part of that is goes to Tourism Harrison, and they take care of all the events like Canada Day and all the marketing for Harrison. They take care of all of that. Just general administration, and then a couple of smaller projects here that are planned. The rink fire pit, boat launch building renovation, which is under planning stages right now. as well as fountain improvements. I believe some different colored lights are planned for that. So that's it for the general operating fund. Now we go into wastewater and water utilities. And just generally speaking, the wastewater and water utilities operate on a cost recovery basis. So we try to calculate the cost of providing the service, and then that drives the actual rates that the taxpayer or the public pays. So the first one on the list is the sanitary lift station number 1 replacement. That's budgeted at about 2.4 million. And that's going to be funded with a combination of sewer development cost charges and sewer reserves. Also continuing on with lift stations, we've got number 4, 5, and 6 that are due for upgrades. It's a cumulative amount of 600,000 to be used to upgrade those. This is a carry forward project from prior year, and it's to be funded by sewer reserve. Also, we've got some sewer line repairs identified that need to be done. It's in McCombs, Cottonwood, and Cedar area. Approximately 60,000 for that, and that's going to be funded by reserve. Also, at the wastewater treatment plant, block and pump base, just to increase efficiencies there. 40,000 funded by wastewater treatment plant reserve, and also a spare transfer pump. These are pretty tough to get, so it's good to have one in case we need one if one fails, and that'll be funded by reserve. Continuing on with wastewater, sump pump and controls. This is a little project basically for the protection of the plant inside should water levels rise. It's 20,000, and that's funded by reserve. And then these following 3 are 2024 budgets, but we wanted budget items, but we wanted to identify them here and put them in the plan because we do know that they're necessary. The first one will be a replacement utilities vehicle for approximately $60,000, and that's either going to be funded by borrowing or sewer reserve. A centrifuge replacement is a 2024 budget item. It's going to be about 240,000, and that's funded by reserve. And finally, the resurfacing of the membrane tanks is about $100,000, and it's going to be as well funded by reserve. So that concludes wastewater. Now we're on the water utility budget, and this capital projects again. So we're working on the membrane replacement for the water treatment plant. It's about 220,000. And this is, again, these are all carried forward mostly because of, again, availabilities in materials last year was difficult, as well as actual just people to do the work. So this should get done this year. It's funded by water reserve. We need to replace the generator at the water treatment plant, and that's funded by water reserve. Some work needs to be done at the St. Al Street water main. That's about 125,000 estimated for that, and funded by water DCCs, as well as the water reservoir repaint and reseal. It's about $100,000. That's carried forward, will be done mid to later this year, and that's funded by water reserve. So when looking at reserves and development cost charges, so there's a lot of information here, but just some highlights is in 2023, the budgeted reserve contributions are 646,000. And that's general reserve, so that's the general operating. And then on the water and wastewater side, another 501,000 is identified to be transferred to reserves. And again, that just pays for future infrastructure replacements and upgrades. Budget transfers from reserves in 2023 is about 2.2 million. And what that is on the general side, that's for things such as the Spring Park project, wastewater treatment plant stairs, boat launch, the project I kind of talked about earlier. Wastewater side, that's for the lift station repairs and the replacements. And the water side, again, for the projects I just talked about, generator as well as membrane replacement. Transfers from DCC, so that's from development cost charges. On the park side, it's 425,000. That's contributes to the Spring Park project. Drainage DCC, so that's basically sewer. Wastewater is 2.3 million, and that is the Hot Springs Road and Lift Station 1 replacement, as well as 125,000 for the water DCCs, and that is for the generator. Moving forward and looking at taxation now, having a look at the assessments in 2023, the total assessed value of all properties is a little bit over $1 billion. And non-market change, what that is basically growth. So that's new properties or upgraded properties that didn't have value before. That's about $8.5 million. So basically, overall increase to assessments 2022 versus 2023 was about 130 million. So that averages out about 13%. Breaking that down a little bit further into class, we basically have 3 classes of properties in the village. It's residential, business, and recreational. And recreational will include campgrounds, etc. So on the residential side, there was a 12% increase in 2023. However, it's really interesting. Last year, there was a 31%. So you can see that softened as expected. But it's a bit opposite. On the business side, there was a 17% increase versus 9% last year. So that's actually kind of went a bit the other way. And then with recreational, 10% versus 16%. So it kind of followed the same. So it was a bit of a challenge because basically the residential increases and business increases kind of flipped last year versus this year. So we had to really think about how we were going to do the ratios, and I'll talk about that in just one moment. This is just generally speaking property tax components. So there's 2 components to property taxes basically. One is the municipal portion. This is the only part that we are in control of as a village. And the other side is basically requisition and taxes, and that's requisition from other bodies of different levels of government, basically. That includes regional district, hospital, municipal finance authority, BC assessment, police tax, and school tax. So those are all will also form part of your tax notice that you'll see this year. On the property tax side, so the tax requirement for 2023 is about 2.66 million. That's about $140,000 more. And how that breaks down is 15,000 of that is covered by growth. And so about 125,000 needs to be covered by current properties. So if we look at the ratios, a lot of information here, I'll just walk through it quickly. Basically, when looking at our ratios each year, it comes down to a residential tax ratio versus what business class would pay versus recreational class. So we really had a bit of a challenge because the assessment had flipped according versus last year of what to do. And council chose to even out the increase basically throughout all 3 classes of properties. So if we look at a very average scenario, average value with an average increase, that means the taxation would be about 5% higher this year than it was last year. And that is about equal on all properties now. That's it for my presentation. So thank you for your attention. And we welcome any questions or comments at this time. I think we're going to ask our Zoom participants first.
For anybody on Zoom, if you have a question, please use the raise your hand button, and then we'll call on you to unmute yourself. Okay, it looks like we have a question from John. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, just a second. Am I unmuted? Hello, can you hear me? My screen says that I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, that's a pretty comprehensive report in 20 minutes. I do have a couple of questions about the budget for 2023. On that $500,000 project in Spring Park, is that a project that's identified in either the Parks and Trails Master Plan or the official community plan? Hello?
Yes, thank you for your, hello, thank you for your question. We got it loud and clear. Thank you. I'm unsure of the answer to that. However, I do know that it was brought to council, I believe, early last year for this project for approval, and it was subsequently approved. I'm not 100% sure if it was included in the plans, but we can get back to you with that information if you'd like.
Yes, well, my concern on that, it's a good example of what I consider to be poor financial management, because the way the municipality is supposed to run is that we're supposed to identify within our official community plan our objectives. And having identified the objectives for such mundane things as sewer and water, we then go ahead and do the financial planning on a longer term basis, as you were doing. You're talking about this being part of a 5-year projection. And based upon those objectives, we then start to plan to make the expenditures. But in this case, as far as I can tell, there's nothing in our official community plan, which is supposed to be the promises made to us, the citizens and residents, as to how the village will develop. There's nothing in that plan that even mentions putting in ping pong tables or toilets in Spring Park. And in fact, the official community plan says that nothing should happen in any of the parks until a Parks and Trails master plan is produced. And there is no Parks and Trails master plan has ever been produced or developed on which we could base these decisions of expenditures. So my concern is that this appears to be $500,000 being spent contrary to the OCP and without the required Parks and Trails master plan, which would lay out our objectives of what we wanted to have happen in our parks and allow us to start to make those expenditures. So in my opinion, that $500,000 project, and I'm a user of Spring Park, or was while I was playing tennis, is contrary to the OCP and is probably an illegal expenditure. I understand it was approved by council, but what I'm saying is I think it was improperly approved by council because it was not on the horizon in the OCP. It's not part of the Parks and Trails master plan, which doesn't actually exist. And it just seems to be, hey, let's spend $500,000 on some stuff because somebody needs a flush toilet to go to. We've operated very successfully with the porta potties in the park for the last 10 years. And these have been very satisfactory to most of us who use the park. And I don't see why we need to spend the $500,000, particularly when it was not anticipated, approved, or identified in any of the official community plan objectives.
Okay, well, thank you. Your comments are definitely noted. Thank you.
I have other questions, but I'll leave the floor in case somebody else wants to come in and ask a question rather than hog the microphone, as they say. If there are,
sorry, we do have another question from Alan.
I shall defer to that person.
Sure. Alan, I'm just going to unmute you here. You should be on the mic.
Yes, it does appear that way, but there we go. I have two quick questions and I'll ask them both at the same time. Just trying to wonder how certain things happen. There was one point, and at the rate we were going through, I didn't always catch everything, but I'm just wondering how the fire department establishes a surplus. There was something to be paid from the fire department surplus, and I don't know how what it is that determines that they can establish a surplus. Secondly, can I find out what Indigenous infrastructure represented? What is involved in that?
Thank you very much for your questions. So I'll touch on them one by one. The first one is the fire department surplus. So basically every year the fire department has a budget, and that will include, of course, the costs for training, the costs for the vehicles, building, etc. If at the end of the year there is the total costs are less than what was budgeted, that would be a surplus. And so how it's identified is that particular surplus will be specifically earmarked for future fire equipment purchases. For your second question on the Indigenous infrastructure, that project is very, very new. So there hasn't been anything identified yet as even to options on how to proceed with that. I know that it's in its early stages, and it will be kind of moving forward shortly with other parties' participation and ideas, etc.
How did that come to be placed on the budget? I mean, there was a line now for Indigenous infrastructure. Somebody must have had something in mind.
Yes, so it's identified that there is a need to have some Indigenous infrastructure here in town. I believe it was originally thought of as perhaps a crosswalk, but it's really changed, I think, or moved from that original thought. And all parties at stake want to make sure they get it right, which is why I think it's taking, just a little bit slower process.
Thank you. And just to go back to your answer to the question about the fire department, I'm not used to seeing everything here, and this is something I'm becoming aware of. But the fire department is a line item. If they're budgeted for a certain amount and a certain amount is expended, then there's a surplus. I understand that. What I don't understand is, does every line item that doesn't spend what it was allocated, or does that carry forward? I don't understand why it's just carried forward. It's just part of the budget. They didn't spend it all. And next year you've got a budgeted item again, and you start from there. I'm just not sure why this particular item, and maybe others that I missed, are carried forward. That's all. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. It's definitely a good question. A number of years ago, it was identified that just for the benefit of the fire department, if there's a surplus on their specific line item, it would be put towards a specific availability just for their use and not go into general surplus. But basically, any other surplus that the village has just goes into general surplus.
Okay, you just said it was established, and I'm not sure why, but anyway, I'll drop it at that point. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
Do I have to raise my hand again? Raising hand.
No,
Hello?
go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Very good. I'd like to ask a supplementary question on the, what did you call it? Indigenous structure or something?
Indigenous infrastructure is how it's identified, yes.
Right. Can I ask, who is requiring us to have Indigenous infrastructure? Where does that requirement come from?
So I'm not sure that it's a requirement, but the request did come from the previous council. And again, it started with the idea of perhaps a crosswalk, but it's kind of moved past that. And so it's in as a kind of a project that needs to be looked at, but it's like, again, it's in its infancy stages.
Okay. Well, I would question that, because I mean, there really is no historical or archaeological evidence of this ever having been an area that was settled by Indigenous people. And we have already spent quite a bit of money on this. Do you know how much was spent on all the Indigenous art around the Dyke pump station, for instance?
I don't have that specific information on me right now, no.
Okay, well, I know that we spent $5,000, possibly more, to erect a flagpole and to fly a flag at the plaza, which is Indigenous. So given the cost of Aboriginal art, I wouldn't be surprised to find that we actually have spent a considerable amount of public funds on putting up some symbolic markers for some of our Indigenous neighbours, but nothing so far for Seabird or Port Douglas or Sheehan or the others who may have passed through here in the past. So if we're going to have anything Indigenous, I would strongly suggest that it be inclusive of all of the Native people who may have passed through here in the past, and more particularly the Port Douglas people for whom Harrison was their terminus of their journey from the end of the lake for many years, much more than Chehalis, which we seem to be celebrating. So I just don't know where this is coming from, and I don't know that I approve of it as an expenditure of public funds. However, having said that, I would also like to ask a question then about legal fees. Do you know how much the village has spent on lawyers in the year 2022?
Yes, I can definitely, I have that information. In 2022 is approximately 22,000 in legal fees.
Okay. Well, I'm concerned about this because what I see happening at the moment is a proposal to hire a law firm to start writing cease and desist letters to people like myself for talking about public issues. And I would think that you need to put 220,000 in the budget for 2023 if that moves forward. And I'd like to ask, why is that a legitimate cost for me, the taxpayer, when it seems to be purely politically motivated and have nothing to do with the administration of the municipal corporation? And is there any control in that? Or is it a case of councillors being allowed to run up such legal bills without anybody saying, hold on a minute, you should be paying for that, not the taxpayers? It feels to me like, as a taxpayer, the biggest taxpayer in Harrison as an individual, that I'm giving the council a stick and they're turning around and beating me over the head with it by hiring lawyers. So is that a proper expenditure? And if so, what is the control on that? And who is actually in charge of that and determining whether or not it's an appropriate use of public funds?
Thank you for your question. I know that from my side of it, I do look at what's coming in through the invoices and whatnot, and obviously make sure that they're appropriate. But I think the greater answer to your question might be better to bring to council tonight at the meeting.
Well, I guess my question is, who has the authority to incur these costs? Traditionally in municipalities, it's the mayor and the CAO and the financial officer who would have the responsibility for that, but they seem to have been swept aside by this. And now we're getting lawyers coming in at the behest of councillors. And when I was a councillor, I was never allowed to call the lawyer and say, do this, do that, and do the other thing. So I'm confused as to how this has gone off the rails so badly. Anyway, I'll leave that with you to think about. I'd also like to inquire about the boat launch. You mentioned spending $25,000 on, was it dock replacement? Could you explain that, please?
Good morning, Mr. Allen. This is Tyson. That is to resurface the boat launch deck to replace the lumber.
Ah, rotten boards.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So that's just a maintenance item. Well, I would suggest that one of the things that's needed at the boat launch, in addition to that, which is good routine maintenance from a public safety perspective, that from an operational perspective, what you need to be thinking about doing is extending that dock, because on the busy summer weekends, we have 20 or 30 or 40 boats that are idling off the dock, waiting for a chance to get in and tie up and get ready to load and come out of here. And we really need some system that allows those boats. It doesn't have to be a big dock, it doesn't need to be the 10 or 12 foot that we currently have, it just needs to be out another 100 feet and to allow them somewhere to tie up while they're waiting to move forward to the rail dock. And I'd further suggest that I don't know what the revenue is from the boat launch, but I wouldn't be surprised that it was $150,000 last year. And perhaps the finance officer can clarify that for me. We seem to be getting 20 to 25,000 of that, and the regional district is getting all the money. And I'd just like to suggest that in this situation, myself and the other Harrison taxpayers shouldn't be paying for that. It's time for the regional district, who are making all the money on our boat launch ramp, to start paying some of these maintenance and operational costs. It doesn't make any sense to me that we have spent probably $250,000, if you include the paving, to provide a nice boat launch ramp so that FVRD can make $100,000 a year profit. Our original business plan with the boat launch ramp was to create a service there that would provide both employment for local people in running the ramp and revenue for the village. And that financial plan seems to have been abandoned. And if we're going to continue with the Fraser Valley Regional District, I'd like to see them pay for the extension of the ramp, the maintenance of the dock, and the renovations to the little building that I built there 30 some years ago. So I just object to paying through the nose for the boat launch ramp to make money for Fraser Valley Regional District. It makes no financial sense to me as a business person and somebody concerned about the bottom line. Has the village explored making the Fraser Valley Regional District responsible for all costs down there, since they're making all the money?
There was quite a few items there to unpack. Initially, I'll just verify that the funds that are being used to resurface the deck are coming from reserves. That would be basically the user pay is paying for the resurface. I cannot confirm whether there's been a discussion for them to take over full responsibility, and that would include financial responsibility. Further to your comment about extending the dock, obviously there would be some fairly large capital costs for that, and also applications to the province, and because there will be additional piles required, and many considerations to extend in that area. I've heard from many users there's some frustrations during the summer, but basically we haven't moved forward or even considered the extension due to cost, and also the process with the province.
Okay, do we have currently a contract that gives the regional district the benefits of our boat launch ramp? And if we have a contract, how long does it run for?
I believe we just signed a new 5-year contract for the operation of the facility. The village does own the building, and of course the required maintenance and such.
Okay, so we're probably locked into another money-losing contract for 5 years. Could I also just observe that if there's one group of people who have a responsibility to provide a boat launch on Harrison Lake, it is the regional district itself, because they collect all of the property taxes from all of those cabins around Cascade Bay and the rest of Harrison Lake, with a little bit of an exception on the Harrison River. And they are the beneficiaries of that. And that's a service that they should be providing primarily to their cabin owners, and they should be paying for it, and not me and the Harrison taxpayers. That's just my personal opinion. As for extending the dock, you don't actually have to put in an expensive dock. You can actually achieve a lot more order and efficiency at the boat launch if you just put out 150 feet of rope with buoys that people could hang on to with their motors dead while they pull themselves forward onto the dock spaces. It's just a zoo down there in the summertime when people are trying to get off the lake, and it needs to be dealt with somehow. Anyway, leaving that for a minute, but staying in the same geographical area, I would like to know how much we have lost in operational costs, including the setup and the teardown, on the ice skating rink that is sitting on the boat launch ramp parking lot. Do we have that number yet? I know Councillor Buckley asked for it back in November or December of last year, and I haven't seen anything come forward in the way of an answer to his questions.
So to answer your question regarding the rink, so we've just now finished the breakdown of the facility. So there will be a report coming forward that will identify the total cost of setup, breakdown, and then whether there was any returns.
Well, yeah, but Councillor Buckley's question was a request for historical costs, not for this year's costs. So you must have within your 2022 financial report, which I believe should be in production with the auditors, a line item that identifies all of the costs that have gone into creating and maintaining the skating rink, and Mr. Schultz should probably have that available to us. Do you, Mr. Schultz?
So I believe that Councillor Buckley was looking for the basically cost of the season. So that would include the 2022, early 2023 season. So we are definitely working on bringing that report to council. We've got all the costs in now. Just recently, as Tyson was saying, it was just put away. So we'll have an all-inclusive report to present to council very shortly, and that will outline the 2022-2023 season.
And further to your comment regarding the historical costs, keep in mind that the initial year was 2019, and then so we'll have that information, which I think that's been reported in the past, and then 2022 or 2020 and 2021, the facility was closed. We tried to open it in 21, and then initially it ended up having to close it due to restrictions.
Okay. If I can turn to drainage for a moment, I'm quite concerned about this. I guess it's a grant application in to spend $2 million on a drain at the south end of Harrison Hot Springs. And I'm concerned about that because I don't believe that is either necessary or desirable. One of the first things that the village of Harrison did in 1949 when they were incorporated was to open up the drain along the west side of the village at the toe of Agassiz Mountain, all the way back to South Harrison and up and into the Mammy River and out to the lake. And that ditch along the toe of that slope was maintained by the property owners in the village for many years until the Tugboat Junction came along, which is on the site that's now the Harrison Terra Estates Live, Laugh, Love high-story mini dwellings, whatever those are. And at that point, that developer went in there and did things to that ditch that obstructed the ditch. And from that point forward, all of the people south of that lost their good drainage and had constant and repeated flooding problems. In some of the developments that happened on that west side of Hot Springs Road, when I was involved as mayor or councillor, we insisted on getting easements for that ditch and access easements to get to it. And that was and should be a sufficient ditch to drain South Harrison northwards into the Mammy River and Harrison Lake. So rather than spend $2 million in digging up Hot Springs Road, which will require highways approval at some point, which could cost another year and $100,000 in permitting, I would suggest that the village needs to look at the natural drainage regime and restore the ditch that exists on the west side behind all those development properties. And right now they're developing and blocking the ditch some more. And to my mind, in the long-term drainage plan for the village that was there for many years, the maintenance of that ditch was always considered to be critical to good drainage. And I just do not understand why the village would want to abandon a perfectly good ditch and go try and divert the water in a different direction. The other problem, of course, is that driveway that was up the hillside should have had drainage put underneath it before it was put in, and that didn't happen either. So I just see that the whole drainage regime has abandoned what we originally set out to do in 49 and since then, and is trying to use Band-Aid repairs instead of addressing the fundamental structure of ditches draining the water where the water naturally wants to go. So where is this $2 million project, and who needs to approve it, and why are you doing it when you could just be spending a dramatically smaller amount of money on ditch maintenance?
So we'll start with the ditch that you're referring to. So that is on private property. There are some sections that are protected in right-of-way and or environmental covenants. Considerations about going in and just opening the ditch up and having it free flowing again, as you mentioned, is the rules behind that have changed significantly over the past 30 or 40 years. There's environmental considerations, there's property ownership, there's long-term maintenance. So there are considerations that need to be if that was to be an option. The drainage on Hot Springs Road is meant to divert the highways drainage to alternate locations, which ultimately end up in the Miami River. There are certain sections that are under-serviced with drainage, and we're hoping that some properties that are seeing significant flooding during large rain events will have an option to discharge their stormwater into a storm sewer. We do know some areas are during high rain events, they're pumping water into our sanitary system, which is obviously we want to separate those two. Does that answer your questions?
Well, it does, but I don't find the answer at all satisfactory, because one of the primary responsibilities of a municipality is to provide the infrastructure. And Harrison was basically a mosquito swamp before the village came in and dug all those ditches and drained the swamp. And that needs to be maintained, and it's being abandoned as I can see it. The flooding problem on one property was largely created by the village's negligence in not ensuring that the proper drainage was maintained. And that while it may be true that there are private properties over which that ditch exists, the village always had the authority to demand the right-of-way and the access easements to maintain that ditch at any point when those properties were under development. And I don't see that as having happened on the expansion of the Springs RV Park. I don't recall seeing anything in the publicly disclosed development approval that indicated that the village had in fact secured the necessary right-of-way and access easements to maintain that ditch. If in fact somebody owns private property and there's a ditch on it, the village can always expropriate a right-of-way or easement if it deems it necessary to go in there and deal with the drainage. So I don't see the drainage in South Harrison as being well handled at all. You allowed the Timbro development to fill in what had been a kind of a soakaway area, and immediately caused enormous problems for all of the neighbors by flooding their houses. And then you turned around and you used my taxpayers' money to fix the problem that should have been fixed at the development approval stage. And then you hired Timbro to do the work. So they got the benefit of filling in the low point, building their development, and then being paid to do the repair. So to me, that doesn't smack of good financial management or a good use of public resources. And I'd hate to see it happening again. If, for instance, you allow the Springs development or the extension of the Terra Estates to completely block that ditch, then myself and the other taxpayers could well be stuck with another horrendous bill for solving a problem that should have been solved by the village at the development approval stage. And why are those things not being done at development approval stage and make the developers pay those costs, and not me and every other taxpayer in Harrison, in addition to which the neighbors who have their property flooded have all the additional aggravation of that happening.
So the areas you're referring to are protected within a environmental covenant. So there will be no filling in of the ditches, and all, to be clear, with respect to the immediate work that's being done, it's all being funded by the developer. It's not funded by the taxpayer. So frontage improvements, which include storm drainage, sidewalks, curb and gutter, and all that infrastructure is actually funded by the developer.
Yeah, you're talking about the roadside on Hot Springs Road. I'm talking about the back of the property against the toe of the mountain. And that has been filled in. I can show you the pictures of the stuff that they put in that ditch. So, and I can produce the property owners past and present who have experienced the flooding from the blocking of that ditch by those developers. Anyway.
You're talking about developers in the past. You referred to the current RV Springs development?
Yes. What's the plan for the ditch under that proposal?
That's protected in an environmental protection area.
Well, every body of water is protected in an environmental protected area by sometimes by municipal bylaw, sometimes by provincial regulations. What I'm concerned about is the preservation of drainage, and municipalities always have the authority to deal with drains and keep drains open, despite the environmental considerations. They have to do it in an environmentally correct way, of course, but they have to provide the drainage. And I don't think it's acceptable to say that we can't use the drains because of somebody's environmental notions of what should and shouldn't happen. We have to maintain drains. Anyway, just my concern. It doesn't affect me personally, but I hear a lot of it from the people who are affected, and I feel badly that they are not having their property interests protected by the village and are being their properties being degraded by the failure to maintain the proper drainage along the toe of that slope on the west side, north into the Miami River. Thank you.
Looks like we have another question from JCP. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. Oh, you unmuted yourself. Okay, you should be good.
Thank you. I'd like to revert back to the comments on the boat launch revenue. As I understand, in previous years, the FERD and the operate the boat launch on behalf of the village. They collect the revenue, they pay out all the expenses, and any net surplus after that the village receives the first 14,000, and the remainder is split 50-50 between the FERD and the village, which would mean that on net revenue, the village would receive $14,000 more than the FERD would receive in any given year as they split the remainder 50-50. Is that still in effect?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, it is. It is still in effect.
So regardless of the revenue collected, once the expenses are paid out, the village would still receive more money from this service than the FERD would.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Can I ask a supplementary question on that? Hello?
Yes, please proceed.
Yeah, well, no, I think that is incorrect. Do you know what the gross revenue was on the boat launch in the year 2022?
We're just looking for that.
Yeah, well, while you're looking for the exact number, I'm guessing it was 150,000. if we get 14,000 of that, that's good. That would leave a balance of, let's say, 120,000 just for round figures. And we should then get 60,000. So we would have had 74,000. But what you have in the budget is 22 or 25,000. So I don't think that that lady who just called in understands the contract. And I've never seen a contract with FARD that says we get the first 14 grand plus half the balance. If that was the case, we would be getting, in this case, $70-some thousand, and we're not getting $70-some thousand. And you said that she was correct about the contract. If she's correct about the contract, then somebody in the village isn't collecting $50,000 that we're entitled to under that contract. So either she has got the contract wrong, or you folks at the village office haven't collected 50 grand that we're entitled to from Fraser Valley Regional District. So what is the gross revenue for 2022 for the boat launch?
Thank you for your question. So as a statement provided by the regional district, the boat launch revenue for 2022 was 105,000. And then basically they minus off expenditures. The biggest obviously cost is the contractor that runs it. And then you're left with surplus. So basically we're guaranteed the $14,000. Obviously, if the surplus is more, we get that as well. And then that gets allocated out to the Village Terrace Hot Springs and the regional district. So the total revenue to the village was 31,000 in 2022.
Okay, well, that starts to shed a little bit of light on it. So at 31,000, 14 of that was the money that we were going to get anyway, leaving 17,000 as being half of the balance. Do we have any control over how much they pay for their on-site operator?
I believe that's all covered by the district.
Okay. And we're on a 5-year contract that we're probably locked into now, are we?
To the best of my knowledge, that is the case. I believe it was just signed now. So just so you're aware, it does go through the RFP process, so that ultimately it's whoever applies and whatever the rates are, and then of course the FVRD will take the best proposal that is available.
So are you telling me that the village has issued an RFP for the operation of the boat launch recently?
No, I said that was the FVRD.
The FVRD has issued an RFP for it, for the operation.
They would have in the past, yes.
Okay, and when was the village's contract with the FVRD executed then?
I can't confirm that.
Would that have been in 2022 or in 2023?
I believe that would be this year.
So it would be this council that would have approved that.
I can't confirm that. I don't know where the contract is.
Yeah, I'm asking because I've not seen it appear anywhere at any council meeting or committee of the whole meeting. And it's been as somebody who started that boat launch and on its current trajectory as a proposed moneymaker for the community, I have an interest in trying to see that it succeeds in both serving the boating community and the tourism community and providing financial return for the village's considerable investment in that whole thing. And I just don't see that happening at the moment. Signing a 5-year contract to me by a council that only has 4-year terms seems to be, well, it seems to be a bit unwise, because you're basically giving away that facility for the next 5 years and you're sticking the succeeding council with the responsibility for that, or if it's not a good deal, they're stuck with it because you signed it off. So to me, long-term contracts to give away our facilities like that are not advisable and not good management. Just an opinion. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in Zoom with a question?
Well, I'd just like to make one more comment if I could. The $2.4 million that is proposed to be spent on pump station number 1, I don't like to see that going into the budget as a confirmed item. I've tried to find out more about that project. I filed an FOI with the village for the documentation and was horrified to find that the councillors didn't even receive the reports from the consultants, civic consultants, Wedler, etc., before making that decision. And I don't think that project should go ahead because it's going to require, apart from blocking the alley that leads from Cedar Street down to the river, it's going to require the closure of a significant part of Cedar Street. And I don't see that it can proceed for a host of reasons, including the fact that the Harrison Hotel has fencing in that area that's trespassing on Village Street and alienating large parts of the street, both in their parking lot and in their restored Quiet Stream Motel building. So I just don't see that as being a good way to spend any money when there is a much better alternative, which is to upgrade the existing vault and put the new pumps in there. And so to me, it's an unwise expenditure and doesn't really achieve much. So I don't like to see it confirmed in the budget, and I guess I'm objecting to its inclusion as a fait accompli. It ought not to be a fait accompli. There are a lot of questions about it, some of which have been raised by the mayor himself. And I think that needs to be revisited and should not be assumed to be a done deal. You'll hear more from me on that in the future.
Thank you for your comment. I'll just talk about or touch on the budget side of it. So we have a resolution from council on this lift station, so that's why it's included in the budget. But just because it's in the budget doesn't make it like it has to be spent. So if council wishes to change direction on it in the year, that's no problem. But it's identified in the budget with best information known at the moment.
While I'm on the subject of sewage, what I think is missing from the budget is a report that says that the P-trap, what some people call a siphon, in the bed of the Miami River under the highway bridge between Miami River Drive and Cedar Street, was something that was a priority for the village, and suddenly it seems to have been dropped and not pursued. That particular pipe that is in the bed of the river is about 1 inch thick of high density plastic that you couldn't bust it with a bazooka, yet you've put a stone weir over the top of it that's destroying the environment of the Miami River. And what that needs to be taken out of the river, and what you need to do is to drop a pump into the vault on the corner, which has the smelly vent pipe at nose level, drop a pump in there and run a lift station pressure line from there down across under the deck of the bridge. And the deck of the bridge was built to accommodate that pressure line. So all the fixtures are there for that, down to Cedar Street, and then probably under the south side sidewalk all the way to number 1. It'll cost you a fraction of any other system, and it'll solve the environmental problem, and it'll take a massive amount of sewer load off the gravity line that runs from Hot Springs Road to number 1 pump station. So I just don't know why that very necessary link in the sewer handling system is being ignored, when that is what you would call the critical link, the weakest link that we have in our sewage handling system. Why is that not in the budget?
As you're aware, there were previous applications to the province, or sorry, I believe, province and federal funding agencies to try and deal with that. We still haven't heard back from them, so we're assuming that's not going to happen. It is a maintenance item. It is functioning properly as it should. I don't believe that there's an environmental concern. Obviously, there would if there was a break, but it is protected as best of my knowledge. And it would be something we'd have to look at in the future. It's not in the, obviously not in this year's plan because we don't have, we're not budgeting for it.
Well, can I just provide one more fact about that you might find interesting? That line was put in by Dan Parr and Harold Grabowski on contract with the school district and was put in as a temporary measure to take the sewage from the Harrison School and get it up to Cedar Street. It was never meant to be long-term, and it was never sized to handle the volume of sewage that is currently being asked to deal with. So, and I can show you photographs of the installation because I was there when it was being done, and it was only ever a temporary measure. And my environmental concern is not, I have zero concern about that pipe ever breaking or leaking. My concern is that the rock weir that you put above the pipe to supposedly protect it from God knows what, there's nothing in the river that could possibly hurt that pipe. That weir is what has upset the environment in the Miami River all the way upstream and prevented the river from flushing out the mud and the sludge that turns it into the morass and swamp that it is in the summer. Until you take those rocks out of there and take that pipe out of there, you are dooming the Miami River upstream of the Settler Pub to be a swamp because you're creating one big settling pond. And that's the environmental damage that I am referring to, not the zero risk of a break in that pipe. You could drive a D6 cat over that pipe and you wouldn't mark it. It's tough. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else on Zoom with a question?
Okay, so we'll move on to questions from the public at this point. Feel free to go up to the microphone and just press the talk button.
Good morning. Thank you for all the work on this.
Hello, can't hear.
Okay, we'll try this again. I just have a couple questions under administration and some of it's more clarity. Under management expenses, can you tell me what's included in that line item?
Yes, thank you for your question. So that's would be salaries, benefits, pension contributions, all inclusive.
Or for say, management staff, like CAOs and
Yeah,
CAOs and stuff. Okay, so that leads me to the question on the 2023 budget then. There's a $150,000 bump in the budget for 2023 compared to previous years, and then it seems to fall back into sort of a normal trend. I'm just wondering if you could explain that.
Thank you for your question. So I'm at this moment unable to comment on specific details of staff salaries due to privacy regulations. However, each year we have to, or we prepare what's called a statement of financial information, also known as SOFI, and that gets sent to the province. It's also published on our website as well. So I would encourage you to look into that report as it comes out for maybe some more detailed information.
Okay. I only asked because right now we're running with 2 senior admin less in the office. So I find it's a little unusual to have a $150,000 bump in a budget when we're actually 2 people short. So you can't comment to that?
No, I'm quite bound to the privacy,
Okay.
but thank you for your question.
Okay, and I guess the other question in professional and special events, that includes legal and other things. I think Mr. Allen had sort of touched on that. Would that also include any legal pertaining to any potential staff issues?
Yeah, so in the professional, I guess, bucket on the budget, that includes things such as legal, of course, and that's for the entire organization.
Right.
Also accounting. It also includes items for planning, consulting, and the budget will change from year to year based on what projects we have going. And it's mostly gets affected by projects for consulting. So for example, if we have a project like I kind of led on to earlier, we're doing asset retirement obligation building assessment, that would go into here. Basically, if it's in here, doesn't necessarily mean it's all funded by taxation. It could be grant funded or it could be reserve funded. But that's why you might see a fluctuation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the public?
Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to ask you what climate action initiatives are being planned for the 2023 year?
Thank you for your question. This program, the Local Government Climate Action Program, is very new to the province. And it's excellent that we've been given this funding. So what we're trying to do is really put together a plan first of what we want to see in the village, and that will include public input as well. Do we need more EV stations? Where do we need EV stations? Or what else can we maybe do with this funding? So it's in its infancy stages now, just because the funding is very new. But at this point, it should be an annual fund for us. So once we have the plan in place, then we can start to identify actual projects based on that funding, but it's just very beginning stages right now. Any other questions from the public? Okay, well, I think that draws us to a close. So basically the next step will be tonight at the council meeting. It basically will be presenting council for third reading, and then the ultimate goal for adoption on the following council meeting. And I think that's about it. So thank you so much for coming today, and thank you so much for joining on Zoom, and have a great day.